Yat Shidina do Shake, Shay Athel Branchin Sha, Biputwan Minishlet, Nakai Bashishin, Synergenita Shache do Nakai Dashanala, Seizizi Denasha, which you can see kind of in the background of my screen here. And I'm speaking to you from Kinthana, and very excited today to have Rex Kontz from NTUA with us to share some information about Navajo Nation water resources, a little more elaboration on that equity gap that we've been discussing in terms of lack of access to running water in our communities on Navajo Nation, and a little bit of elaboration on what has been done to close that gap recently, as well as aspirations for continuing to close those gaps. And so with no further ado, I want to hand things over to Rex to introduce himself. And then I'll go ahead and provide a little more introductory remarks, and then Rex will do his presentation. And as always, we'll have an opportunity for questions from listeners. So be sure to post those in the Facebook live chat. So thank you. So Rex, it's all you right now.
Thank you. Ethel, appreciate the invitation. We worked together when you were with the nation as Attorney General, and a lot of great support there. We did some very unusual things. We took over a community that was governed by state of Arizona. We got them to agree to relinquish jurisdiction to Navajo, and we're able to fix a system there that was contaminated. And we've been providing water there since that time, and got things transitioned, got the state to release it, allow Navajo to take over and govern it. And so it was kind of an unprecedented thing that happened, and we got a lot of support from you during that process. And everything went as planned, and it was very quick, very efficient. And we hoped that would be a model for lessons learned, that we could find ways to work through issues and concerns and do it quickly. There's a lot of great ideas, a lot of visionary people out there, but we always say every visionary needs some nuts and bolts people. And I see the work that you're doing, in response to COVID, and you rallied a lot of people, pulled them together, a lot of hands-on people, but still great vision, great direction, great leadership. And those are models that we need to be thinking about on how to make stuff move forward. And you always say, mark of a great leader is that a leader unifies. They bring people together. And we see a lot of people promoting certain things today in today's society, and yet much of it goes towards division, separation, opposition, and challenge. And that's not leadership. Leadership makes people come together. Common goal, common vision, common mission, things that we all believe in. So, we're going to talk about water today, and water's life. You got to have it. If you ever had any kind of survival training, they say 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water. And if you don't have those things within that system, you put yourself at great risk. And so we all have to have water to stay alive, and you can only last, a number of days without water. So it's absolutely necessary. And water's always been a challenge on Navajo. There's been, some activities and things. I came out of the Indian Health Service working for their Office of Environmental Health, their construction branch. So I was in charge of building water systems, delivering water to homes physically, managing Navajo Engineering and Construction Authority crews as a representative of the OEH office. And after about 8 years of doing that, I transitioned to NTUA, been here 35 years. And my job there was to quality manage all those and make sure that what was being built met specifications and delivered the best service to the people. So in that sense, I've been involved in water most of my career. And that's kind of been the underlying mission for me is to try to figure out how to get water to people. So it's a kind of lifelong work. And of course, as I moved up through the company, I got involved in other things and had to take on other challenges within the company. But it's all been good. It's all working towards the same goal. So what I wanted to do today was to just kind of give people a broader picture of a long-term strategy and vision that a few handful of people have kind of come together and created. And I will say this, that there's good people, they have good heart, good mind. But even with that, sometimes we still don't disagree on certain, we still disagree on certain things.
Yeah.
So there's always some lively debate and, arguing over what the target should be, what should come first, what should come next. And so I'm hoping this overview will help people understand. There is not a real hard, fast, rigid plan. Things change in time, but we looked at all those dynamics and considered things and just have some very broad reaching visionary goals of where we want to try to take the nation. And there's been a lot of good work to try to set up some foundations and create some pathways that will try to bring these things to reality. So with that, I will say I listened in on your session last week and saw some of the individuals that were active in trying to meet an immediate need, get water into the home, especially those that didn't have pipe water. And those people are working very hard at that. And, they're doing a good work. The question always comes up, how sustainable is it, and what's the long-term goal?
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll kind of talk through that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we go forward, what I'm going to do is basically just give a map of Navajo, and it has some representations on there that talks about some major pieces to be considered, and they all kind of fit into part of the puzzle. So as we go through that, I'll try to elaborate and guide us through that representation. Okay.
Great, awesome. Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the main things that came out in last week's discussion is, really highlighted the need for sort of the broader, the groups that are active, at least on the waterfront, seem really supportive of sort of broad scale infrastructure development because they're able to help on the margins. But in order to be able to serve the maximum number of people, there is that strong need for the coordinated utility sort of infrastructure. But I did want to share a couple of opening remarks here, just to kind of situate everyone. We have the CARES Act funding and significant nation received significant funds through that. And now we have the ARPA fiscal recovery dollars, about $2.1 billion. And that's kind of where we are right now in terms of the nation allocating that towards different purposes. And I think just in the back of my mind is always the recognition that the nation's list of needed critical infrastructure projects is almost to the tune of $20 billion. So, getting $2.1 billion from ARPA is helpful, but it doesn't move, it's not going to move the mark that much in terms of closing the equity gap that exists in our community. And I think, I'm hopeful that there will be a conversation at the national level about this broader gap that continues to persist in Indian country and Navajo Nation in particular, with such a large landmass, such a rural community, and the need for a focused infusion of dollars to our community in order to ensure that our people have equal access to basic 21st century utility resources, really, at a minimum. But with the $2.1 billion, a significant amount of that has been allocated. I think $200 million for administrative costs. There's been reimbursement of projects, infrastructure projects that were originally funded through the Sihasin fund and the PTF, Permanent Trust Fund. And so there wasn't that much remaining when legislation was introduced in late November to sort of allocate the first phase of funding. And that would have dedicated $1.2 billion towards water and wastewater projects, broadband projects, home electricity connection projects, housing and housing renovation projects, bathroom additions, and hardship assistance. And then of course, fast forward, that legislation has not progressed. And in the intervening period, there has been legislation to allocate $500 million in hardship assistance directly to the Navajo people. And that was approved by council and signed by the president. So that is underway. And so now, that was, I think, double what was in the original legislation from November. And so now there's $250 million that is going to have to be dealt with, the absence of half a quarter billion dollars. And so that could potentially impact the infrastructure component to that legislation, or it could impact the next phase of legislation, which I understand was going to address healthcare needs, social service needs, as well as potentially economic development. It's a little unclear to me. There might have been, economic development might have been part of a third phase of legislation, but the landscape is changing, and it has changed with the current hardship legislation and allocation. So, but we wanted to hear from Rex more about the water projects. And then of course, just that broader water context that he was referencing earlier. And, NTUA is the major utility, I believe it's the sole utility. I don't think we have any other utilities that operate on Navajo Nation, and Rex can clarify that for us. But I want to talk a little bit about NTUA because they're a unique utility. They were established in 1959, so quite a while ago, with the purpose of being a local utility. I believe NTUA was the first tribal utility in general, and is one of the largest. It may actually be the largest rural utility service in the country right now. And Rex can correct me if I'm wrong in that regard as well. But it's a multi-utility enterprise as well. They provide electric, water, wastewater, natural gas, solar energy, and communication services. And their customer base for water right now, I believe, is about 41,000. So pretty substantial customer base. And it is a self-sustaining enterprise of the nation. And so just a little bit of background on NTUA. I may have stole Rex's thunder on sharing some of that information, but I wanted to make sure that folks were familiar with that. And I think you guys actually have independent bonding authority as well, which is unique for tribal utilities for sure. So NTUA has often been at the cutting edge of utility development in Indian country. So I wanted to give that recognition to the enterprise and to Rex and Mr. Haas and the good work that they've been doing. So with no further ado, Rex, I can go ahead and throw up that map that you want to go through. And if you want to start with your presentation, and then we'll come back with some discussion and incorporate the questions we may have received on the chat. So thank you, Rex.
Great, thank you, Ethel, for that. NTUA was established, I think, in 1959. So more than 6 decades, closing in on 7 decades of existence. Navajo Engineering Construction Authority is also about that same age. And we've worked in combination with them and the Indian Health Service during that whole time. And their public law 86-121 funded water and wastewater projects. But it's like a lot of government programs, it was designed to be a 10-year program, and now we're going into almost 70 years, and we're still not done hooking up homes. So, you know, that's just part of, you know, dealing with governmental process and things like that. So we're looking at ways to try to remove and some of those challenges and to streamline things. But what you see before you is just the basic reservation map. And to give you an idea of what it represents, all the blue lines that you see on there are existing NTUA water systems. And as Ms. Branch related, there's about 40,000 water connections there. We estimate about 15 to 16,000 homes that still lack water. And to help you understand that, all those little black dots that you see on there come out of the Indian Health Services SDS data tracking system for homes that have requested water and still don't have water. So the little bunches of black dots kind of give you an idea of where water systems still need to be expanded into in order to meet those needs. You'll see on the far west, the former Bennett Freeze area, there's a lot of homes there, all the way down into south of Cameron into the Loop area, a number of homes there, because development was not allowed in those areas. And now it's opened up. So I know there's groups working on trying to figure out how to overcome that challenge. The red lines are conceptual transmission mains. These are going to be large mains that will move what we would come to call bulk water, moving large volumes of water across Navajo to increase the supply. Navajo has been largely supplied by groundwater. And as everyone knows, we're in the middle of a drought. I think recently they decided to call it a mega drought. And I remember Chairman Ricky Nez with the RDC, you know, asked the question in a meeting, you know, are you guys aware that this is a mega drought? And I said, yes, we are. It was predicted to be 7 to 10 years, and I think we're in year 14 now. So it's gone on a lot longer than was predicted, with no real end in sight. With that, there's a big push to take advantage of the San Juan River. There's the Animas La Plata flow that comes out of Colorado. That joins the San Juan east of Farmington, and then it flows all the way across the northern edge of Navajo. So, and then on the far east side, you have the Cutter Dam system, and there's water captured there. So those are all sources of water that the nation is going to tap into. And these red lines are what was envisioned conceptually to take that water and to try to move it across Navajo. So I'm thinking at this point I need to probably update this map a little bit, because the far eastern side you have what they call the Cutter lateral line, and that whole red line on the eastern side is now complete. It's in service. There's water flowing through it, and there's a treatment plant that's been built at the head of it. So it's now supplying all those communities of Torreon, Pueblo Pintado, Ojo Encino, Huerfano. They're all intertied now, and the main source of water is the surface water coming out of the dam system. So we're going through that process of getting people used to it. We had a concern voiced to us from people out there saying the water felt different, and the process of treating it actually results kind of in soft water or softened water. And so, yeah, it has a different feel to it. It has greater wetting capability. So when you add soap to it, it suds it up a lot more, and it's a little bit harder to rinse all that off. So people just weren't used to it. It felt different, and that was their description. But we had to reassure them that it was good quality, healthy water. And so they're kind of getting into gear of using that. But you have tremendous capacity there now. And we're looking at planning some watering stations in that area, because they'll be able to take great volumes of water, unlimited without being restricted. We have tried to restrict our domestic system just to domestic use. And we basically have always said we don't supply livestock water. And we had to be careful with the wells and the tanks to allow too much hauling of water because we could drain our tanks. And so with that cutter system is kind of the first model. We'll be able to put watering stations on there that people can haul high volumes of water. They can use water for livestock. They can use water for construction. There won't be a limit on what they can do with the water because the source is tremendous compared to what it was before. So if you kind of come a little bit to the west, you see the lines coming out of Farmington into Shiprock and then going south. Portions of that are under construction. The line between Farmington and Shiprock is called the Navajo Municipal Pipeline, and it's using primarily settlement water from the Animas La Plata settlement. Now, this will be a key point for us to remember because in the Animas La Plata settlement, it took water out of the Animas River, and different individuals got rights to some of that water. So Navajo has rights from that river. There was 2 Ute tribes, and they were pretty wise. They insisted on storage. So a reservoir called Lake Nighthorse now is constructed. It's holding water. It's right next to the city of Durango. So there are 7 parties that have water behind the dam there. 2 Ute tribes and Navajo. Navajo has water stored in that dam.
That's great.
So the way you access it is you authorize a release that comes down to Animas, joins the San Juan outside of Farmington, and it comes through Farmington's treatment plant. So that's how we would get that water if we need it. We haven't withdrew any at this point, but that was the supply for that Navajo Municipal Pipeline. Now, the one thing that we somewhat forgot about was that term water in is water out. We came up with that term because any water that comes into a community, you have to have a wastewater component. Once you use it, you have to be able to digest the wastewater. So there was not a wastewater component negotiated in these water rights on the New Mexico side. So New Mexico Navajo water rights are settled. We have about 20,000 acre feet of water. So just so everybody understands what 20,000 acre feet is, 1 acre foot equals 326,000 gallons, okay? 20,000 acre feet, with all of our 40,000 connections across Navajo, we use about 10,000 acre feet a year. So in the New Mexico Navajo settlement, we got 20,000 acre feet, which is 2 times more than what we use across all of Navajo. So that gives you an idea of the volume of water that we have a right to now. Once a treatment plant is put in Shiprock where you can withdraw that water, it'll supply water down that red line that's going north and south. It'll come down 491, it'll go into Crown Point region, it'll come towards Winderock, it'll go through Gallup and east, west, and south of Gallup to Navajo communities on the other side of Gallup. So that's the intent of that project. And as I said, there's portions of it that are being built right now. The plant is still being somewhat sited. They haven't nailed down the site, and then they'll be going through the design stage. So when you come further to the east or to the west, on the northern part, there's a Utah Navajo settlement that recently was approved, and it will take water out of the river again, and it'll move it southwest to through the communities of Old Jato and into Kayenta. Now, some of the things that we want to communicate here is that although that's a settlement, it'll move that water, you still have to move that water beyond Kayenta. So you have systems in Rough Rock, Chilchimbato, many farms, and there's gaps in between those systems. They're not intertied at this point. So one of the goals is to intertie those systems and be able to move water from the north all the way down through all the way into mini farms and into Chinle. Now, Chinle's system does extend south, and there's about 11 miles between the South Chinle and lines that come out of Burnside Junction. So if you tie that 13 miles together, you can see that if you look at Chinle in the center and kind of follow that blue line, you'll see a bunch of black dots in between. So if you bridge that line and intertie them, those homes that are, those little black dots that are unserved, they will now have the ability to be served. And you could theoretically move that water from the north all the way down through Burnside. Burnside and Ganado are being intertied. There's some additional source that's being put there. And then Ganado and Burnside migrate south into cornfields. And the goal is to intertie that with Lower Greasewood. Then from Lower Greasewood, you're already tied into system all the way to Delcon. So theoretically, you could move that water from the north all the way down that corridor, intertie your systems, and give yourself a great backup of water supply. So the question is, how much water do we have? The Utah settlement is 81,500 acre feet. So the Utah settlement is 4 times the size of the New Mexico settlement. You combine those two together, that's 100,000 acre feet of water, which is 10 times what we use today through our meters. So that, you know, there's tremendous potential for us to have water supply for many, many things. Economic development, industrial uses, as well as residential services. And you could probably reinvigorate agriculture and farming communities because you'll have the water to do that. Okay. So if you go further to the west, you'll see another red line corridor, and that's what's being negotiated now is the Arizona Navajo water rights settlement. And if that goes through, another big pipeline will be built north to south, take water all the way to Cameron, to Tuba City. Hopi will probably get water rights in that settlement, and water will come across there into the Hopi region. So where I said we have groups working on those things, there's a couple of groups. One of them is called the TAG group, Technical Advisory Group. And they meet on a routine, and they're talking about these big picture plans. And when I say we still have some disagreements, I'd like to see that pipeline, that red pipeline, go from Cameron to down the edge of Navajo back into the Loop region, because there's a bunch of homes down in there, and actually move bulk water down into there. The people in that region have talked about reinvigorating agriculture in that area, and that would be perfect solution to that. So those are things we're still kind of arguing about. I'd like to see that during that settlement, that they negotiate that pipeline along the reservation line. There's some coordination and interconnect and thought process, because my understanding was the Navajo Department of Transportation was already pursuing a right-of-way for a highway that would come from Twin Arrows up along the reservation border and tie back into the Cameron region. So you have a paved road. We found out about it because they wanted to know if we wanted a utility corridor. So we got utility corridor on both sides of that highway right-of-way. So if that ever gets funded and gets built, we'll already have right-of-way, and we can run those lines down alongside that highway. So, you know, there's some good visionary planning. It's just a matter of how do you bring it together and get it funded, and finding sources of money for that. So it kind of gives you a general overall conceptual plan of how we would make use of granted water. And then the next goal is for the nation to start envisioning how to use that water, how to grow the communities, how to create access, and to partner to a greater degree with Indian Health Service on extending those lines into those areas where the black dots exist, so that they can have system connected to their homes. So many of those black dots are where the group from last week are trying to haul water to these people. And in the bigger picture down the road, we want to try to get a pipe system to them, because you'll definitely have the water. You'll have the water available to do that. So that's the bigger long range picture, something that's more sustainable. there are, people who are seeing this and are trying to work towards accomplishing it. Now, this map has been out a while. At the time it was created, the black dots were quantified by IHS to be about 4,400 homes. And we felt that count was low. During the CARES Act, their headquarters group came out and they did some work here. They created some transitional watering points, I think at 59 chapters, small diameter, mostly for home use, hauling. And but during that time frame, they also worked to try to identify the target of who needs that water, who needs water hauled to them. And in that, they upgraded that 4,400 number to over 9,000. And by the time they finished their work here, they had upgraded again to about 11,000. Okay. Now, if you take the sanitary deficiency system that logs all their project requests that they've identified, and you count all the homes in the SDS database, it's over 22,000 homes. So we have gone into that database for some short-term projects like cistern projects, putting a tank at a person's house that they can haul water to. And we have found that the data is a little outdated. We find a home in a region, we investigate it, we find the home's not even there anymore, or it's abandoned, different things like that. So it has to be updated a little bit. So I still feel pretty confident that our estimate of about 15 to 16,000 homes is about accurate, of homes that don't have pipe water. And it kind of lines up with our power. Our power, we think, is down to about 13, 14,000 without power. And our meter count has about 1,000 customer difference. So those two numbers would kind of line up mathematically if you were to think of it that way. So that kind of gives you a picture of what we're envisioning, what we're trying to accomplish. But these inner ties need to be looked at. They need to be engineered and designed. Some of the systems may need to be upsized in order to move the volume of water necessary. There definitely is a need for more pipelines, more water tanks, and more booster stations to move that water. Once the great volume is there, you still have to move it to the homes. And so back when we first created this, it kind of became a subject for discussions. And I had one group, national group, that contacted us and wanted a comment just like we're doing today. And the question that they asked me was, what will it take to make all this happen? They said, what is it going to cost? So at that time, my ballpark figure was about $4 to $4.5 billion. And everybody kind of gasped and said, where are you going to get that kind of money? It'll never happen. And I said, well, the Navajo Gallup started out as an $880 million project. And in today's dollars, it's over $1 billion in value when they're done with it. Okay, the Utah settlement is $250 million. Navajo, through the Permanent Trust Fund and the Sihasin that they did last administration, funded about another $250 million, $245 million of water projects. So you got $1 billion on the Navajo Gallup, another $500 million in those different efforts with Utah and Navajo's efforts. So that's $1.5 billion. By the time the water rights are settled on the western side, we estimate that might be another $1 billion. Okay, so now you're $2.5 billion. If the target is $4 billion, you're only $1.5 billion short. Okay, Indian Health Service, after the CARES Act, Congress and senators, they came and they said, what do you guys need? We said, one, we didn't have enough time. Number two, there wasn't enough dollars. There's much greater need than what we could meet. And we said there are programs like the 121 program that's grossly underfunded. Okay, so every year that unmet need keeps growing. Even though they're spending money and hooking up homes, they're not even breaking even. It's still growing. It's getting bigger instead of being reduced. So we said that program is grossly underfunded. But we've been asked to comment before, and it sounds good in the meetings, but then what happens? Nothing seems to happen after that dialogue. Well, in this case, during the passing of the infrastructure bill, they fully funded the SDS. So there's a tremendous amount of money that's coming to the 121 program. So they're estimating roughly about 675 million that may come to Navajo. And so that's a little over another $500 million. Okay, so now we're about $1 billion to $500 million short. So it does look like it's, eating an elephant one bite at a time. But the vision of the last 30 years is actually starting to become to the point where it is physically possible. But we all have to stay focused on pushing forward together with a common voice to understand what we need. Okay, so there are some things that are missing. Okay, number one, we are asking the litigators for the Arizona side to remember that we need wastewater disposal. Okay, so they should ask for that for any of these communities where the bulk water gets to. They're going to need wastewater solutions. The second thing that all three of them, the first two didn't include, and we're asking the third one to include, is storage. We need reservoirs. We need it's flowing water. River water is flowing water. So as it flows, if you don't take it, it goes downstream. So for our protection for future drought or continuing drought, we need to pull that water and to store it. And as we grow and we start using it, then we can start withdrawing it. But you always need to have some storage, okay, for protection during dry times and just for future growth. So we're really wanting people to consider the need for storage. For the eastern side in the middle of Navajo, that will be a new pursuit that we're encouraging our leadership in the president's office and in the council in any of their engagements at the federal level to start talking about storage, about reservoiring, because we need to be able to pull that water and hold on to it. And so that's kind of the big picture goal. That's kind of where we need the third challenge that we all run into is how do you acquire the land so that you can extend the lines and to build development? And anyone that's tried to do and build anything on Navajo knows that the right-of-way process is quite a bear to get through. It's taken us, a year to sometimes 18 months to get right-of-way. Indian Health Service tells me their projects take anywhere from a year to 3 years to get right-of-way. So you're pretty much in a hold state. You can't spend until you get that right-of-way. So the nation really has to figure out how to streamline that process and to make land available so that you can extend system and then you can build development. Commercial development, economic development, community development. The economic gives you employment. Once you have employees, they need housing. Your kids need schools. The family needs healthcare. They need government services and community services. They need groceries, gas, everything that just sustains a community. So it all starts to grow and blossom from that. But right now, we will have the water to do it. We started out with communications by running a route from Farmington to Shiprock, down to Yatahe into Window up 191 over to Kayenta, Tuba City, and then we took an arm out to Delcon with fiber. 550 miles of fiber we installed. It was a cooperative grant. We had to pay part of it. The grant paid for part of it, but we got that. Since that time, we built some ourselves. We financed some. We got additional grants. We've increased that broadband fiber route to almost 1,000 miles of fiber now, and we're still, working on facilitating more. We had 30 towers across Navajo, and we've increased that over to like 120 towers now. We're still, got plans for more towers. So we're trying to reach as many as we can on the communication side. So you'll have connectivity for school, development, telecommuting, whatever you want. You'll have big pipelines to move water. We have to build power lines big enough to move the water. You got to pump the water in some cases. 491, for example, we're going to be installing a 115 kilovolt line to move that water. But you're only going to use 20% of that power to move the water. 80% is available for whatever else you want to use it for. So 491 is a model for economic development. You got 4-lane highway, you got fiber, you're going to have a 36-inch diameter water pipeline, you'll have a 115 kilovolt line, 96 strands of fiber. So you have all, the elements to grow your community, your development along that corridor. I've even encouraged the president and them to move their offices out there along 491, get a bigger airport, build a real nice controlled fairgrounds. If you've ever been to the fair in Window-Rock, how jam-packed it gets. And you have a lot of open territory along 491. There's a lot of possibilities once you start to back up a little bit and look at the infrastructure from this 20,000 foot level of what's possible. And with the water rights settlement, you really have opened tremendous possibility and tremendous potential. But we got to figure out how to use it and take advantage of it. So that's kind of in a nutshell, the big picture water strategy. But it does tie to other things. So at this point, any questions? Open for dialogue.
Okay. I'm looking here to see if we have any questions. I don't see that we do from the viewers, but that was all really helpful, Rex. And I found it interesting that you guys have identified 15 to 16,000 homes that are lacking piped water access right now. And your current service population is about 40,000. So that's almost a third of the homes. I mean, it tracks the 30% statistic that we usually hear referenced by the tribe. And what I do hear from EPA, actually, from the feds, is about 20%. So that's probably closer to what IHS, at least previously, was estimating. But really, really interesting and helpful to hear that context of how much we're actually using right now and how much is available through these settlements. One thing that was curious to me is for the existing pipelines on that map, it seems like most of the water sources for those are probably groundwater at this point, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if we are able to get these pipelines in, that will relieve some of the pressure on the draw on the groundwater, which is, I mean, that can only be a good thing, I would think, to let those aquifers restore a little bit. Interesting. And so in the original legislation that was proposed in November for the infrastructure projects and the hardship program, I think it was about $250 million that was dedicated to hardship. And so that would be, if that legislation, if the hardship component is removed and that legislation progresses, it seems like there will be maybe 750, $850 million to help you close that gap that you'd identified for the 4 to 4.5 billion. Is that right?
Yeah, if you look at the 2.1, right up write-off, they took about 400 and some million for some immediate services. So it dropped from 2.1, down to about 1.6. And then they took the 557 direct to hardship to people's pocketbooks. So that left about, I think, 1.16 or something like that left. So that's what they have left. The infrastructure proposal, it was something that the president's team was putting together, largely infrastructure, but they had some housing in there. They had some other targets within that proposal.
That's right. Yeah.
It was about 950, I think it was 958 million. So that was at the NABI level, trying to get a vote to go to formal vote by the council. And during that discussion and debate, they elected to move it backwards into a work session and rethink the whole strategy. So that's kind of where it's at this point. It's kind of interesting because they opened the portal and asked for chapters to nominate projects. It didn't seem to be that there was any criteria or categorization of what's eligible, what's not eligible. But I saw one tabulation that said there was something like 18 or 19 billion dollars worth of requests, and you had a little over $1 billion to spend. So for every project that gets approved, you would have 18 of them that would not get done just because there's no money. So it kind of puts you in an awkward position because you're basically going to look like you're saying no to everything, even if you say no, if you say yes to one. And that became part of the dialogue. I think is there are needs out there. A lot of them are legitimate needs, but it's a tremendous amount of need on Navajo. And so everyone wants their projects to get funded, but there's still not enough money to go around to fund all of them. So it starts turning into, we're going to amend it and add this. But at some point, you quickly fill up what's left. And in order to add anything more, you got to take away from something else. So I think there was like 115 million left. If the proposed legislation stayed intact, you had about 115 million left. And by the time we got to the discussion on the floor, I think there was already several amendments that totaled more than 300 million. So there was already requests coming in that was going to go beyond what was available. And there was other people wanting to propose more amendments. So that's kind of where the whole thing kind of got backed up. And it's a difficult dialogue because, how do you tell somebody that their project can't get funded? And it may actually be a good legitimate project, but you only got so many dollars in the pot. And then how did the leadership and all the technical people try to decipher and pick which projects are going to get funded? So it's not an easy dialogue, and it's not something that we should all start pointing fingers and say, well, council did that, or president did this, or NTUA or whoever. Those are real live projects that many of them are needed projects. Some of them are not eligible based on ARPA legislation qualifications. So they definitely have to go get funded some other way because they don't qualify. Then there's a lot of them that do qualify, but there's not enough money to fund all of the qualified projects. So, you have to try to determine what's the best project. How do you set the priority? What we were trying to do in a very conceptual, broad-based manner was to create a foundation that you can build upon. There are some funding programs out there that will fund smaller projects, And that's what's been used up to this point. So if you use the big money to create more infrastructure base so that you make it possible to add more the smaller projects, that gives you life beyond ARPA. If we move water into regions that don't have water, the traditional IHS model can now build more projects because now there's a water system much closer and greater capacity. So, you know, what comes first? Well, you got to find a way to have the capacity before you could just add the line. And you can't add a bunch of lines that have no capacity because you can't supply them. And trying to get people to kind of understand that, because you got a long line of people that are waiting. I mean, they're applying and they say, I need water in my house. And it's not an easy dialogue. It's not an easy dialogue to sit there with somebody and tell them, we don't have the capacity to serve your home, or you're too far from the system. So NTUA typically did not get into cistern systems, which are standalone 1,000-gallon tank in the ground septic system, but it allows them to haul water, put it in the tank, and then they can use their plumbing like normal. They got to be conservative. They got to have a place that they can haul water from. They got to haul water from a drinkable source, which are all things hard to control. But we typically didn't do that because our business was running pipelines and domestic system. We don't generate revenue. There's no way to collect revenue from a cistern system. But with CARES money and with ARPA money, we got involved in administering and engineering and using NECA to install and build some of those systems, just to get them done, to give people something that they could use that would work. Okay, the long term, you know, looking at our map, the long term is that hopefully down the road, if this plan does get in place and get realized, we start hooking many of those cisterns up because we will now be moving major systems into those regions where they didn't have a pipeline. So that's the long-term strategy. You know, eventually we want to try to get as many cistern homes hooked up to a pipeline long-term. You know, our solar program is the same. If they're too far from a line, we give them a solar system. It's a 3,500 watt system. It's large enough to power up a full-size refrigerator. So food storage, medication storage, you know, we build a system big enough. We also are probably the only company that maintains ownership over the life of the product. So they pay a monthly fee, but if we do maintenance on it, we try to keep it running. If the battery dies, we put in a new battery. If the solar panel gets damaged, we put in a new panel. If the unit dies, we pull it out because it's built on a trailer that you move in and mount. We can remove one and pull another one in. So we take care of it for the life of the product. They typically will live about 20 to maybe 25 years. Hopefully within that time frame, we find a way to extend power into that region and we start converting them. So we're already seeing that now with some of our older solar systems, and with this ARPA, LUN, and the CARES funding, we're actually starting to hook up some homes with power lines and decommissioning some solar systems. So it's gotten to that point where we have expanded enough that we could now reach into areas that were only solar home possible before. So it's slowly going the direction it needs to. It just has to migrate over time. But we're trying to create ways, means, and projects to keep moving that model down the road to get sustainable services into home, and to you know, just modernize everything so that everybody has the services that the rest of America enjoys. And that's really a big goal because the census shows that people are migrating away from Navajo. I read one older report where it was like 22% of Navajos lived off Navajo. And then I saw a more recent one where they were estimating something over 40% were living off Navajo. So the people off Navajo had doubled in about, I think it was like 12 years time. because we don't have 8 to 5 jobs, the modern conveniences. You go down in the valley and you can look north, south, east, or west, and you can find a Walmart, right? And you can't find one Walmart. There's not even one Walmart in all of this 27,000 square miles. There's not one Walmart. I think there's only 2 working, functioning movie theaters. So I can watch a movie in Winter Rock, and then I got to drive all the way to Tuba City to watch a movie over in Tuba City. But other than that, there's no other movie theaters on Navajo. So there's a lot of things that are possible with this large infrastructure-based project, that if we get those things in there, those types of things can be created on Navajo. And we went through an exercise with the chapters along 491. We brought them in just before the pandemic hit. And we talked about this global plan. We talked about them partnering with each other to plan for growth and development, to envision growth and development along 491. And the ending exercise we put them through was, we said, name all the things that you leave Navajo for. When you go and travel off Navajo, what are you going to get? And so we had several flip charts, and we said, just name them. We'll write them down. Okay, we'll capture it. So I figured it would take 5-10 minutes to do that. And 10 minutes went, and they were still naming, and we were just flipping through papers, adding more things. Finally, I called a stop to it, and I said, okay, the homework for you chapters is to go back and how can we create that on Navajo so you don't have to go off Navajo to get it? When you go into Gallup, what do you get in Gallup that you can't get on Navajo? So how do we in turn create it on Navajo so we don't have to leave Navajo? And we had a delegate that he said his father saw that they lived a distance away from 491. And one day he stopped by and visited his father, and his father said, what do you see out there moving? And the son says, I see a bunch of cars, driving up and down the highway. He says, I see a river of money, and all that money is going to Gallup, and none of it staying on Navajo. And I saw a statistic where the dollar exchanged hands 7 times in Gallup, but it only exchanged hands twice on Navajo. So we generate a little bit of money, but it quickly goes off. And it doesn't turn around in our own community. It services and sales. So they're making tax off of that dollar 7 times. We're doing it maybe once or twice. So that's what this whole infrastructure-based plan is designed. Big pictures, how do we create that development and invigorate it? So with the infrastructure base that's being put in, especially with the settlement, the water settlements, infrastructure won't be the limit. You'll have unlimited water, communications, and power. So now what are the other barriers to creating development on Navajo, to create services and employment on Navajo? The infrastructure base will be there. How do we, in turn, as a nation, figure out how to create that? That's our challenge.
Yeah, I was looking for those stats that you mentioned. The last time I saw the out-migration stats was in the public safety report that Chief Francisco had commissioned. And it was just shocking to see the percentage of out-migration. I think it gave the number of Navajo people living off reservation in like 1980. And then it gave the current data, and it was just like unbelievable. Like the statistics had flipped, like only 20% were living off reservation in 1980, and then it was like 80% or something shocking like that for like current times. And I'm sure it has to do with the lack of 21st century living conditions in a lot of our communities. whether that's, like really basic things like running water, electricity, or having access to high-speed internet, and having access to external markets through the internet. People don't have reliable internet access. They can't rely on that as a sales mechanism. And so people leave in order to access the economy, economic engagement. So that's really exciting. I mean, certainly it sounds like the New Mexico side of things, in terms of water development, is funded. And now I guess that red pipeline running south from the San Juan River, that's probably Halchita, right, where it starts up there and then runs down to Old Jato and then Pienta, hopefully.
Mhm.
And that's a really neat vision that you laid out, just connecting all those pipelines down to Ganado and even tying into the Dilcon system. The Western Navajo stuff, I mean, I don't know if negotiations are active at this time. Hopefully they are.
Well, they're active, and
Okay.
I was asked, I was given the honor and the privilege to be able to give testimony. So that's been set up, and a lot of it's centered around this same concept. As far as economic development, they always say with businesses, location, location, location. So I said, well, where's the movement of people, and where do people congregate? So when you think about Navajo, if people are trying to move across Navajo, east to west, there's only two main roads. You got 160 across the north, you got 264 across the bottom. And then you got all these north-south arteries. You got 371, 491, 191, 89, but you have those north-south arteries. So anybody that's moving across Navajo, they get on those paved roads, and that's where they move. And anywhere you have an intersection, you have a potential for economic development. So Sheep Springs is one of those areas, right? It's the only way to go over the mountain and get to 491 without going around it. And Sheep Springs chapter was very excited about growth and development, because we can only afford one project. So I said, well, what if you withdraw that area and invite the remote chapters to come in and build a business? They can take their revenue home, generate money for their communities, but your community benefits from having multiple businesses that come up all at one time. The goal there is to get people to slow down and stop at the Sheep Springs Junction and leave money. Okay, they have a little vendor village, but they've never been able to rent out any of those cubicles. Okay, because you just don't have enough business flowing through there to make it financially viable for those vendors. Now, if you had a lot of people coming to Sheep Springs and they had a bunch of different things going on there, and they would actually stop and visit several vendors, then you might have something that could potentially grow. Okay, in my mind, I'm envisioning, and sometimes I get some frowns by the locals, but I see Coyote Canyon, Twin Lakes, Tohatchee, Mexican Springs, all growing into one community at some point. Growing together and becoming one community. They're already paving the road from Navajo over the top of the mountain to come out at Mexican Springs.
Right.
I think about a third of it is done. So once you have that route, you're going to have people flowing through there. You got one intersection from Crown Point to 491. You're going to have another one coming in from Mexican Springs. And if you put vendors and stuff along the highway, and the other way to look at it is when you drive into Gallup, everything on each side of the highway as you come into Gallup is businesses where you leave money, right? When you get into the interior of Gallup, then you start getting into the housing, schools, hospitals. Those are further away from the hustle and bustle. I call it the quiet zone. That's where housing, hospitals, and schools are. But right on the road front is economic development, it's business. So So anywhere we have a lot of travel, those communities need to design businesses along there that's convenient just to pull off the road, buy something and spend money. So that's how we have to change some of our thinking about what we do. On the western side, Tuba City's up on top of the hill, out of sight. Everybody that's driving on the highway between Cameron and Page, they can't see Tuba City. So unless they know it exists, no one's going to drive up there to go do business. Okay. If you had business down at that intersection, you have a greater potential of people pulling off and buying something and shopping. But nobody's planning anything down at the intersection. But that's where we're not seeing the potential of what could be done. Okay. So when you're at this level, looking at this whole reservation map, and you can see the travel ways I'm talking about, you can see the intersections, you can see, you know, Cameron did a study and they said just during tourist season, you got 5 million people that come through Cameron. So they created 2 roundabouts that slowed traffic down, and they opened up a curio shop, a restaurant, 2 gas stations. Everybody said, oh, 2 is not going to work. You barely have 1 that will survive. Well, both of them are busy all the time. Okay, now there's another Navajo business that's trying to build a motel there with the thought that they're going to say, well, that's the south entrance to the South Grand Canyon, and then you can head north and go to Powell or North Grand Canyon. But come back and stay here, and we'll take care of you, you know, while you're touring. You know, good thought process. And you know, I have no doubt that family has created other businesses. They got some business outside of Page, and they have some business inside of Page. So these are Navajo entrepreneurs.
That's right.
And those are the people that we should be supporting and backing, and even our leadership, because they're doing something. You know, they're doing the right things. Housing is a major challenge because you really have a need for middle income.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we have low income. I had one director who's no longer there who said he had 600 units that were renovated. This is with NHA, that were not occupied because they couldn't find qualified occupants. Everybody made too much money to qualify for the low income housing. But we have employees every day that need middle income housing. If I'm trying to recruit people to come to work for us, housing's a challenge. I got no place to put them. So, you know, if you go to Flagstaff, Phoenix, Tucson, you got money in your pocket, you can be in an apartment within a week, right?
Right. Yeah.
You don't have any apartments on Navajo that you can rent. You know, there's no way to establish your residency very quickly unless you have family and they got family life. You know, so those are the challenges that we have. But the nation as a whole has to start figuring out how to change that model, because it's a repetitive model that's still the same problem, still the same blockage for year after year after year.
Well, I don't know if you have this data, Rex, but I would be curious in terms of the CARES Act funding or even the ARPA proposal. Do you guys have a sense for how many homes were connected to the your water lines through use of the CARES Act funding, or could be connected to those lines with respect to the ARPA funding?
Yeah, I can give you the general figures on with the power lines. We connected over 700 homes. We targeted 300, and we kept moving real hard and fast, and we started getting close to 500. So we reset the target to 500. But by the time we were done, we served 714, something like that.
Wow.
The water, we were basically told by Indian Health Service, maybe it's a misinterpretation of the question asked, but they said there was no low-hanging fruit. There was no homes that were close to a system. So we went after their cistern list. and we installed, I think, a little over 100 systems. In that process, we also partnered with community development, and they were building bathroom additions and plumbing them. So we targeted those homes and comboed a project where we take a cistern system and then build a bathroom addition and plumbing. Got water to those people, and then if they were lacking power, we either got them a power line or we got them a solar system. And some of those homes already had power as well, so that was good. But we tried to make sure that they got all services together. There was a little bit of a coordination with the short time frame, but we were able to accomplish it. So in this ARPA proposal, we're targeting something similar in volume, but with the water lines, we were trying to increase it by quite a bit. Just out of necessity, we were getting really hardship cases from either the president's office or the speaker's office during the CARES Act. So we investigated them and we worked real hard to try to find a pathway to get them services for water. And we did about 30 homes. Those were, elderly people, some people that had disabilities and things like that. So we were able to get through the clearance process using emergency declarations because they were in a state that they needed special assistance. With the ARPA, we were trying to partner with community development again, and we targeted about 1,000 homes to get bathroom additions and plumbing, and we would provide water either in the form of a water line or a cistern system. And then if they were lacking power, we'd put them on one of the power line programs or solar program. So we were kind of working through that process. There was applicants that applied, so we had to go out, visit them, see if they were feasible and what type of service they would need. So what we did with those when we put the proposal, we put the number as to be determined, but we had a volume. We said we physically felt we could do 1,000 within that 36-month period. That kind of got questioned by council. I guess they didn't quite understand what we meant by to be determined. And they said, well, you guys want money and you don't even know what you're going to spend it on. I said, no, we have applications with the name. There's an existing house there, but we have to investigate it. And we also have to try to get right away. And so we don't want to necessarily say it's Joe Yazzie and find out that we can't get right away or something's wrong. So that had to be, we're trying to clarify that with them because they wanted to pull all that back and we would have lost all of our services if they didn't, because of the misunderstanding of what those numbers represented. So we're just, trying to get clarity at this point, see if we can salvage the legislation and get it back on track and not have it come completely off the rails. So that's kind of what we're looking towards.
Okay. We did have a couple of questions. I know we're a little bit over time, so if we need to wrap up here, we can. So Rex, let us know do you have time for another question or two?
I'm okay. Okay.
Good. Thank you so much.
Regina will monitor, and if something else is coming up, she'll move it around.
Great. So one question is, what percentage of the black dots are not feasible for community water main access? And then what's the solution for these people? And so you've kind of, and the cistern is one of the solutions, but do you have a sense for, what percentage of those? I mean, yeah.
Well, if you just look at it visually, like you look at Bennett Freeze, you would say those are all cistern eligible right now just because there is no system there. But once you have system there, then they're possible to get hooked up with extension. And if you use the 121 money that's in great bulk at this point, they can start designing core systems, even off of that theoretical settlement pipeline. They could do feasibilities and start envisioning extensions out there and sizing them properly, and they'll have the money to execute it. So that's what we're pushing towards in our dialogues with them. Some of these areas have actually been investigated by them. There are projects, but the cost per home was too high. And so they left them on their not feasible list because the cost was too high. With the infrastructure bill, they removed that economic factor. They said, we're going to waive the cost per home limit. So that makes a lot of these projects that were economically unfeasible are now fundable. So, you know, if they needed a booster station and there was 15 homes, they would say, well, the cost of the booster station is too much and it raises the cost per home, so that's not feasible. Well, now that project's feasible, they can afford the booster station and serve those homes. So there are several of these, like in the Ojai area. Some of the IHS engineers have said a lot of that stuff is they did do field studies and they have a rough design, but the cost per home was too high, so they just put them on the shelf. So those all have to be pulled back off the shelf and need to be dressed up and finalized. So, you know, if we were to plot on all their proposed projects, we'd start to see more of these blue lines. You know, we could color them different color, but to show them as proposed lines that have already been feasible out. So if you see pretty good clusters of homes, they probably have been investigated for pipeline.
Great. And then another question, this is the last question we have, says, regarding the capacity and system demand, has a survey ever been performed to see how many people would move home if there was water available in the black dot areas? That's an interesting question.
You know, I don't think anybody's ever really tackled a overall assessment of that. They have the water access group that IHS is sponsoring. They're talking about this, but it's really garnered around hauling water to homes. And they have a lot of interested parties, different university groups and things like that they want to help out. And I keep encouraging them to use those groups to go out in those regions and to collect that data, find out what's really out there. Now, the other interesting thing is they put in these 59 transitional watering points. They put them on the chapter compound so they wouldn't have to go get right away because it's already within the chapter withdrawn area. And they put them behind the chapter's meter. But IHS put forth about 2 years worth of money. So they're paying for the money. They're paying for the water. So people aren't paying for anything. But when their money runs out, somebody has to now pay the water bill. So that's one thing, you know, from a sustainability standpoint, where's the chapter going to get the money to pay for that? The second thing, when I said you should have these people go out that want to volunteer and help to see what's really out there and what are the needs. They didn't do that, but they're finding many of these watering points, they're not getting much use, and some have gotten no use. Nobody's using them. And my point to the group when they were talking about planning this out was I said, those people are living in a remote area. They already have some way of getting water. So they're already taking care of themselves and they're living there. They've established a way to survive out there. So they may not want to go drive all the way to the chapter to get water if they already have a source that they're using or that they're comfortable using. So they may not change their habits. They may continue to get it from wherever they're getting it. And so that's kind of proven out if people aren't making use of some of those sites that were established, they already had a way of meeting their need and they're not changing their way of whatever they were doing. So now if I can get to the point where I can get a pipeline to their house, then they don't even have to haul water anymore, you know. So however they're doing it, you know, hopefully that's really the long-term strategy. But your question of has there ever been a full assessment of everything out there? There hasn't. Now we did work with a doctorate student. He studied this map, and he did a study, localized study in 3 regions. And he reached out to IHS and he got their base data so he could actually blow it up and see where the homes are actually located.
Hmm.
And he said for every home in their system, he could see 2 other homes within eyesight that were occupied and lived in that wasn't in their system. So at that time, they said there was 4,400. So if you just said, well, based on his data, he could see 2 more there that they don't have in their system, you could easily triple that to 13, 14,000. So, you know, that's one documented study, but like I said, it's localized. He didn't study everything reservation-wide. And,
Yeah, and that really matters from what we're finding with our help requests from our constituents. And you can kind of see it on this map. You know, there's very limited water access in like the old Jato region, Navajo Mountain, former Bennett Freeze area. So we're seeing some of you know, like 60 to 70% of some of those communities don't have access to running water among our constituency. And so, you know, if he was not looking at those regions, he might have a very different picture, like if he was looking in the Chinle region. That's
exactly. You know, and I know one of the areas he was looking at was down in that Loop region, because you have some groups down there that have been somewhat active because they're not getting service. I don't know if you remember the Forgotten People down in the Black Falls area and Grand Falls area. That's why he took and looked at that area as to what was being done there. And his study took a little bit different approach. What he did was he was trying to get an economic feasibility, not for capital build, but for sustainability. So if you hooked all these people up, would you generate enough income to keep them operational? So as he was going through that, his course of study, partway through, he told me, he says, it'll be 25 years before you guys start to break even and make money. And I said, okay, that's what I need. That's what I need to understand. The opposite going beyond that is, what do you need to do in that community to make it sustainable? And towards the end of his study, he says, you guys will never make any money. And I said, well, that's been the situation for 4 decades, and somehow we've stayed in business. So, you know, let's get the data, let's study it. And so he created a model that would predict those things. So to look at your projects and see whether they're really sustainable or not. So it was a pretty interesting study that he did. But the big factor was trying to bring in growth and development that would help your community sustain. So let me say that another way so I can try to help everybody understand. In Gallup, based on my conversation with the former water manager there, 70% of their customers are larger than residential. So the larger customers get charged a higher rate or a different rate. On Navajo, only 5% of our customers are larger than residential. So our whole system is pretty much a rural system. And most utilities break even on the residential or they lose money, but they make it up on the large customers. So the residents are usually heavily subsidized by large customers. We have no subsidization because we have no large customer base. So the goal for us is the same thing we challenged the chapters on 491. How do you create that on Navajo so that you can create the economy, the income, and the subsidization so that the residentials can be supported? And as our population starts migrating off, you're losing your residential base. So then your income starts to go the opposite direction. So those are things that the nation has a real challenge on how do we reverse that model so that it starts going the other direction towards growth.
Well, thank you so much, Rex, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and your additional insights regarding development challenges and economic growth challenges as well. This was really informational, and I hope our viewers were able to learn a lot from this as well. Yeah, thanks for giving us the overview of the impact that CARES Act funding has had in terms of connecting homes to utility resources, and the possibility that lies ahead in terms of ARPA infrastructure funding opportunities and closing that equity gap. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time and providing such an informative map. And I hope that we can have you back at some point to talk about more of these things. But we really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you, Rex.
No problem. Again, thank you for your leadership, pulling people together. I wish we had more people who had that ability or understood it well enough to bring people together. So I'm here at your invitation because it makes us come together. So
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you also for when you were giving the overview of your lifetime commitment essentially to providing access to these basic modern resources for our people. I mean, it really does take that kind of a commitment to make an impact. And your 30+ years of working at this challenge is really admirable. And so I just want to thank you for that and the continuity and leadership that you provide NTUA and making it more effective at serving our people. So thank you for that, Rex.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. And
yes, thank you. Go on, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.